Hello and welcome to Looking into Cultures, Episode 3. We're very fortunate today to have Thupten Tendhar from the University of Rhode Island to talk to us about Tibetan Buddhism and Tibetan culture, especially as yesterday was the Dalai Lama's birthday. Welcome, Thupten.
Thank you very much, Cynthia.
Can you tell us a little about your background?
Sure. So I was born to Tibetan parents. I grew up in India. I joined a Buddhist monastery when I was 12 years old. I stayed there for 20 plus years, and then I came to the United States. I joined the University of Rhode Island. I did my master's and PhD in education at URI, and I've been working here at the URI Center for Nonviolence and Peace Studies.
Very good. And I'm very sorry I did not present you as Dr. Thupten Tendhar. I didn't do my homework. I'm very sorry.
No problem.
But as you have been a monk, I would like to ask you, what is the monastic tradition?
Yes. So when we say Tibetan Buddhist monastics, there could be a little bit of difference between each monastic, institutions. Mm-hmm. But normally speaking, when somebody become a monk, mm-hmm. so the parents give permission for the child or the young adult or the adults mm-hmm. to live in the monastery and stay there studying, practicing, or spending the rest of their life in the monastic community as a part of the bigger spiritual community.
I see.
Okay. Is Buddhism a religion and the Buddha God?
That's a very interesting question. Because, when you read Tibetan or Buddhist texts and scriptures, mm-hmm. you will often find some words that are translated as God, which is written as a small God, okay. A small letter mm-hmm. G-O-D. That really is like a divine or celestial.
Okay.
So mm-hmm. that from that perspective, you can say, once the Siddhartha became a Buddha, he became, somebody who is enlightened, which is with a small God or celestial or enlightened being. Mm-hmm. But Buddha is not considered as a creator, and mm-hmm. so neither in Buddhism. In Buddha said, you are your own creator, meaning that, and also he says, you are your own, you could be your own, worst enemy or the best friends, meaning you are the one who changes your life mm-hmm. and future lives. Mm-hmm. So from that viewpoint, so Buddha is not the creator mm-hmm. or a creator. It is you who creates your own future. Mm-hmm. All right. So from the second part, which is that Buddhism, it depends on how you take it, and many people take it as their guidance for their way of living. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it's more like your spiritual guidance for a peace and better life.
Mm-hmm. I think that's kind of hard for me to think that that I'm being the creator mm-hmm. and that there's nothing outside of me. Is it that there's actually nothing outside of you?
So what it means is that, in Buddhism, definitely it is considered that there are many enlightened beings. Mm-hmm. They say countless Buddhas. Mm-hmm. So there are so many enlightened beings mm-hmm. who may, try to teach you, guide you, benefit you in different ways, including giving their, teachings and teaching through verbal instructions or by living examples and so on. So there are other enlightened beings. Mm-hmm. But what it meant here is that, when it's I think it's like it is you who can do actions or control your behaviors and thoughts. So in that sense, when somebody do some positive action, it brings some positive result. But it is ultimately you who did the positive actions.
So nobody's going to come save you.
Uh,
You
so-
have to save yourself, right?
That's very important. Yes. So Buddha said, he had no power to bring you to the enlightenment. He said the best thing he could do is show you the path, but you have to walk there by your own.
Oh, it puts
Yes.
a lot of responsibility
Yes.
on ourselves. Yeah. Oh, that was your question, right? Is Tibetan culture synonymous with Tibetan Buddhism?
I wouldn't say exactly, but there are lots of connections. There are spiritual traditions in Tibet. Before Buddhism came to Tibet in the 6th century, so there are Tibetan tradition before that. But since Buddhism came to Tibet, it became mingled with the spiritual traditions, the culture, local language, etc. That so many things are highly interconnected with the Buddhist view of life and thoughts and behaviors and so on. So I would say many of the Tibetan cultures are mingled with the Buddhist ideas or Buddhist practices.
Well, I noticed last night when we were at the Dalai Lama's birthday party, the dragon and the bull in the parade, do they come from pre-Buddhist times, like maybe shamanistic type?
Oh yeah, so those two animals they call the dances, animal dances. So first one is supposed to be what is called snow lion.
Okay.
Yes, the snow lion is when you see it performed, you see some with the green hair and so on.
Yeah.
So that's little different, but that's how it is also called as a mythical animal, very unique to Tibetan mountains.
Okay.
So it's called snow lion, and snow lion is represents like fearless and elegance, the qualities of human beings.
Okay, so it's not necessarily shamanistic.
Not necessarily, yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the second animal, which you see with horn and black fur, that is called yak.
All right.
So, right?
How could I forget that? Of course.
And yak is very, related to Tibetan culture. They're, the nomadic life, and also their fur used to make tents, and they are used. Farmer use it for plowing the lands and so on. So it is related to, and it lives in the high altitude. Even though today we have some yaks and yak farms in Colorado and some parts of the U.S., but right. So, but yak is considered a very special animal to Tibet.
I see. Okay, I think it's your question.
How was the Dalai Lama selected? Is he considered like an incarnation of the Buddha?
Oh, very good question. So the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama is very important, and currently it is being discussed widely throughout the world. And so traditionally there are search groups after sudden Dalai Lama passes away, highly spiritual realized persons of Tibetan Buddhism, they form a search group. And so they do observe in nature, in the clouds, in the river, in the ocean, in the lakes and so on. They see if there is any symbol, significance that gives them clue or direction towards finding the reincarnation of the Dalai Lama. Or other Dalai Lamas, as other spiritual masters as well. So reincarnation of Dalai Lama also includes like examining the candidates, whether he or she could identify the things that belong to the predecessor or not. And so it also there are many such process, and the Dalai Lamas are considered to be the emanation or reincarnation of Bodhisattva called Avalokiteshvara, who is like the essence of compassion of all Buddhas.
Okay.
So from that perspective, yes, Dalai Lama is considered as an emanation of Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara.
And
But
can you tell us, like
yes.
you said, that they go to several boys and they want to see if they can identify something. What are those things that he identifies?
For example, the current Dalai Lama, when he was, very little, and so they have some, the prayer beads called mala,
Right.
and the canes that belongs to the predecessor, eyeglasses that, belong to the predecessor. So things like that. So it might depend from one reincarnated Lama to another. Usually they try to make exact copy of things or some of the things that belong to the predecessor, and so it looks identical, and you have to identify the exact thing that belonged to the predecessor and distinguish them from the copied items.
Oh, that's really interesting. Okay, Frank, could we have the slide about the Four Noble Truths? So here we have the Four Noble Truths. Existence is suffering. Suffering has a cause, desire, and attachment. The end of suffering is nirvana, and the path to end suffering is eightfold. Could you take the slide off, please? So, existence is suffering. From your point of view, do you think that the average American thinks existence is suffering from your working with Americans and et cetera?
I think, there are different viewpoints about, the definition of suffering itself, right? So I think that is important to study more about what suffering is and what Buddhism identify as suffering, right?
Okay.
So from Buddhist viewpoint, the very first thing is to recognize and realize that there are suffering in the world, right? And what they mean by suffering is suffering not necessarily is the significant illness or disease or things like that, but that is called a suffering of suffering, which is the pain that we can feel, we don't want. But there are other things like suffering of change, right? Because when we are younger, people do feel uncomfortable when they're aging or changes, and in terms of different status and so on. There are so many things that we like to hold on that are usually related to suffering of change. And then there is another one, which is pervasive suffering. Pervasive suffering is like something like our own body or this globe, which is by nature it is supposed to change. It is supposed to undergo a degradation or whatever the natural process is, and that is pervasive. It is in nature, but when we face it, we find it painful. Many people. So that is a different point of suffering. So it is important to realize that the nature. By nature, there are types of suffering, and when we realize that, then we try to go to the next step, which is what are causes of those suffering. So that is second step. And then when we find that the causes and conditions, then we are able to say, okay, so how can I, get beyond those suffering? So there is diagnosis. Then you apply the medication or whatever the prescriptions, and then even the final part is intaking or the practicing that path.
Well, the thing about desire, it's saying something about the cause is, well, at least one of the causes, you said change, but also desire. And I just see, to me, American culture is grounded on desire, especially since it became a consumer society since
Yes,
World War
true.
II. And, I don't know, I just think that we're going to suffer forever as a result. I shouldn't say that, but I'm sorry.
That's a very good point. I think it's related to what is called attachment in Buddhism. So in Buddhism, they identify three main causes. One is the attachment, other is ignorance, which is lack of understanding, and the third one is hatred or anger. So those three are considered the root causes of all the pain and suffering in the world.
So desire, anger, and what was this third one?
Attachment.
Attachment.
So the attachment or desire, attachment slash desire. The other one is ignorance or lack of understanding. The third one is anger or hatred.
Okay. Well, ignorance is my best one. I have less ignorance than I have anger and attachment. So the question actually was, there supposedly is an eightfold path to end suffering. What in American culture do you believe works against the eightfold path? And of course, I already gave my opinion, but about desire.
Yes. Of course, I know there are many great people and practitioners in America, and and different parts of the world. But we also have, so many challenges, and one of them is to do with our, as we have more, commercial and consumerism and so on. So we have more desire to own different things, and with that comes with too much focus on I, right? We have iPhone, iPad, so much focus on I, and that is sort of like emphasizing or maybe strengthening our ego syndrome. And so I think that is a little bit contradictory to living what is called Noble Eightfold Path, which is, like right livelihood, right mindfulness, right speech, and so on. When we are too much focused on I, then we may not care about how we are speaking out to other people. And from Buddhist viewpoint, that shouldn't be the case. We have to be, mindful about how we speak. So that is right speech in order not to hurt or harm others, right? So that is important. And then also right livelihood. So that relates to, if we are concerned about living a better life, we have to see how we earn our livelihood. So that it's against, or that relates to minimizing at least of crimes or dishonesty, and and also the selling or using things that harms others' life, etc. So those are some of the things that happens here, and also I'm sure in many parts of the world, which could bring more, by changing those, we may bring more peace and positivity and sense of belonging, friendship in our society.
Right. Okay.
How does compassion figure into the Buddhist belief?
Yes.
Is it part of the doctrine?
Yes, compassion is highly emphasized in Buddhist scriptures. And so actually it relates to even the main goal of becoming a Buddha, right? So when they say, I want to achieve nirvana or I want to achieve Buddhahood, then, that relates to like the goal of helping to solve issues and problems of society, of other people, and self, of course. And so that comes with compassion, which is like a deep concern for the suffering and pain of others and try to reduce those suffering. That is compassion. And that is highly emphasized in Buddhist scriptures, Buddhist practice and meditation. And so I think that is in this, it's a necessary part in that.
Yeah, we could use more of it.
Yes.
Right?
Oh, right.
Yes.
So much more. What similarities do you see between the American value of self-help and the Eightfold Path, if any?
Yes, self-help, I think that is very important, particularly in our current society where we have unfortunately, many young lives losing to, self-harm, right? And then there are many people who are undergoing, the challenges to do with mental well-being and wellness. So that is, I think, very important. From this Eightfold Path, one of them is, the right mindfulness, which is trying to focus on something positive or something that brings positive impact, right? So I think with self-help, many times, from psychological viewpoint, we are talking about positive self-talk, which is saying that, you might be facing challenge, but you will be okay. You are able to do this. You have the capacity. You are valuable. Things like that, and those are important and related to the Noble Eightfold Path, which leads to positive and happy living.
So the Eightfold Path requires self-help,
Yes.
and yet compassion requires helping others too. I mean,
Yes,
not
yes.
and yet, but
Yes.
also.
Yeah, it's important that when we talk about compassion, many times, people focus it on just helping others. In doing so, we miss taking care of self.
It's a good point.
Yeah, right. So when we, don't take care of ourselves, then lots of mental, issues and other issues comes up. And then when we are overwhelmed by negative emotions, negative forces, then we are no longer able to help others. So self and others related to the well-being of self and others are highly interrelated.
Right.
Therefore, self-help, self-care is very important. And that's what we say, compassion towards self and compassion towards others. Right.
Right. Is it your turn?
Were there any difficulties you had when you first came to America adapting to the American way of life? American culture?
I think I had some, but luckily that was not a major because, I was so fortunate to meet with many Americans who are warm-hearted, very open-minded and so on. So I didn't have a big, the culture shock and so on.
That's good.
Yes, yes. But of course, from, general viewpoint, of course, when you come to a new place, you're unfamiliar with it, with law, with food, and with culture, and so on.
But it's
So
a good feeling.
It's a good feeling.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like last night, I felt good at the party.
Right.
I mean, I just felt like I was in another culture.
Yes.
And I love that feeling.
That's right.
That's just was great.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Okay. is sitting quietly doing nothing the same as inaction? And how important is taking action in Buddhism?
Thank you. I think in Buddhism, of course, taking action is very, very important. Taking action is very important. But that doesn't mean that we have to go out and do something else, right? So in action from Buddhist viewpoint is that even when we meditate, we are sitting silently doing, or even not physically doing anything, but mentally we examine our own mind, our emotions, and thinking about how to transform our energies. And we are doing a lot of things. So that means sometimes people get, when they say somebody is sitting quietly or meditating quietly, people may think, oh, he or she is doing nothing. That's not the case. When we think about action, it could be physical, it could be verbal, emotional, mental. And so I think the most important is to transform our mind so that we don't have negative emotions to come out in physical expressions.
Well, when I was in Russia, I went to a Buddhist monastery near Mongolia, and I was working on a U.S. Embassy program, so I was with the English language officer, and we went to the Datsan, that's what they call the monastery, and the head Lama came, and we were introduced to the head Lama, and I told him all the places I'd traveled, and he looked at me and said, just like this, "You have seen a lot. Now it is time to act."
Oh.
And I thought, oh my God, I don't know what to do. It was very, I still don't know what he meant, exactly what I was supposed to do, What do you think he meant?
That's a very important point. I think, in education and so on, today we've learned a lot of things. But when it comes to applying those ideas in way we live, sometimes we find it difficult, more challenging. So that is, I think, applying what we have learned into practical living or in changing, for the betterment of society, so that we actually utilize what we have learned. I think that's, that's what generally it means, applying what we know to a way of living so it becomes more effective, more result-oriented.
Yes. Well, we're getting close to our closing time, but fortunately we're going to have another episode of Tibetan culture with Dr. Thupten Tendhar, and thank you. So I think that we have a couple of minutes, and in the last minute, I want to ask you if there's anything in American culture that works against the Eightfold Path to end suffering.
Okay, great. So I think, here we emphasize a lot on, individualism.
Yeah.
And I think that is a little bit different from the Buddhist viewpoint, which is the main idea itself of becoming a Buddha is not to benefit self, but primary purpose is to benefit the society. So it's society focused.
Right.
And so when we are focused too much on individualism, and then we are then we may not be able to utilize our human capacity at the maximum level. We have such a great heart. We have such a sharp brain, but if we use it narrowly towards an individual, we are, I think, wasting a lot of our potentials that we can do for a greater part of this world and future generations of the world.
Our human potential, that's
Yes.
right. Well, thank you everyone for watching, and stay tuned for another episode with Dr. Thupten Tendhar talking about Tibetan culture, and tune in for our next episode on looking into cultures.
Cynthia.